The Diabetes Podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking to your doctor.
And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Dr. Garrett, and as always, with us is Dr. Grady. So today, we're talking about intermittent fasting.
Yes,
right?
Yep. Yeah, something that both of us have experimented with and done quite a bit, and also read a lot about too.
Why don't we can maybe start off by talking about if what our current status is. If I don't even know if you're doing it or not, unless we can maybe go on some personal accounts and then kind of dive into some misconceptions about it, why a type 1 would or wouldn't want to do something like this.
Yeah, so as far as me right now, I kind of do it in and out very sparingly, not as much as I used to do. And only probably major reason is right now just my schedule is just chaotic enough to where it's hard to schedule out my meals efficiently throughout the day to where I'm not starving myself all day long, because I like to do it like 16/8 type method, not necessarily 24-hour fasts or longer. And so if timing doesn't add up right and I'm going to end up starving myself for longer than I need to, usually I'll eat a little bit to get me through. But on days when everything flows nicely and I feel like I need it to help with my gut or blood sugar or whatever, mainly most things in my life are driven by blood sugar. So if I'm feeling like I need a little boost or need a little help, I'll do some intermittent fasting. But so on average, maybe like a couple times a month.
Couple times a month. Okay. So
Yeah,
tangent.
so not very much, not near as much as I used to.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't intermittent fast, like pretty much at all. But kind of almost a side tangent, but related at the same time. We both got some CGMs at the same time. You know, I'm back on Team Dexcom. You're trying out the Libre. So excited to be back on CGMs this year.
Oh yeah.
But do you think that getting started, because I think maybe when you were experimenting with intermittent fasting, were you on a CGM? Were you on a constant glucose monitor?
I think I can't remember specifically the first time I did it. Probably not. But I have done instances where I did a long stretch of intermittent fasting while I was on a CGM. But when I first started, I don't think I was. I was just checking it a lot back then.
Got it. I think that's by far one of the most important things. If you, one, we always talk about data, right?
Yep.
This season, last season, always talking about data. You should be checking as much as possible when needed. But if somebody were to start as a type 1 diabetic, start intermittent fasting, you should probably be checking a whole lot. I was on a CGM when I started and when I was doing it. And I think that info and that real-time data like is important to understand what you would do from an insulin protocol to combat what is or isn't going on, right? Maybe if you do treat your blood sugar, you know, how you would do that. So I'm excited to have a CGM again, but I think it's I'm always more inclined to do intermittent fasting if I can know my blood sugar at any given moment.
Yeah, like because intermittent fasting is such a powerful tool that it can be used and be very beneficial for your body, but at the same time, it can be used and ultimately be somewhat detrimental to your body. And your blood sugar, at least for me, and especially being a type 1 diabetic, like blood sugar is a great window in your body and how it's working and maybe how much stress it's under. And so like if stuff starts going haywire with your blood sugar, it's probably a good sign that something is stressing your body out quite a bit. And if you're doing intermittent fasting, that may be the thing. So, and when I say that, like things fluctuate pretty crazily when you're doing intermittent fasting, both down and up, and they change very quickly, to where maybe you have to change basal rates um, or stuff like that. And so it's helpful to have that CGM to be able to know, okay, when I do intermittent fasting at these times, at this point, I need to actually start increasing my basal rate because it's going to start spiking, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. To be able to compare what you're feeling, what you're seeing, and if you're on an insulin pump or on multiple daily injections, how that changes all of that. It's really, really important information.
Plus, at the same time, I always thought in regards to intermittent fasting, like I feel like type 1 diabetics actually have an advantage when you're doing this versus a regular person, because we are our pancreas, so we can control our blood sugar. Because I find a lot of times with my patients that have started or tried intermittent fasting and ultimately felt worse from it, is had a lot to do with the fact that their blood sugar was dropping too much. And so, as type 1 diabetics, we can control that by giving ourselves less insulin and stuff like that. So I've always thought that was kind of an interesting win for us, that we can navigate it sometimes a little bit more successfully than normal people.
We have the ability to, right? But then
Yes.
we're burdened with the conscious thought of being our pancreas at the same time.
Yep.
You
Oh
know,
yeah.
I would agree with that. If you're super dialed in, yeah, it's definitely a blessing. It makes me remember a time when I was at a CrossFit workout, and I was telling, so many times, if you're athletic in any capacity as a type 1 diabetic, maybe you've experienced somebody saying, "Oh, you're so lucky, you get to use insulin," and I was talking about how with somebody that, oh, I actually have increased red blood cells because I have a form of thalassemia minor, where just it's not detrimental to my health whatsoever, but my body compensates for less or smaller red blood cells for a lot of them. And I was telling the CrossFit people, I was like, yeah, I have more red blood cells, and I'm doing intermittent fasting, and I'm on insulin pumping. It's like, you're like bred for CrossFit. Like, you're literally like, you have more oxygen, you have more insulin, and just in terms of that biohacking world, it can be, sometimes things can be beneficial, but no, I'm not. We're not bred for CrossFit, but at the same at the same time, there is advantages, I think, of being your own pancreas, that we can utilize to our advantage. And I think it's a really positive thing, actually.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So coming back to intermittent fasting. So let's first talk about how to maybe safely go about starting it or trying it out.
Mm.
So like for me, some of the big points that I would say are, like we already talked about, making sure you're checking all the time, whether that be with CGM or finger sticks, is obviously hugely important. But at the same time, I feel like diet going into it can oftentimes make it a lot easier, both on your body itself, but then also mentally for yourself. So like I like doing somewhat of a keto or especially lower carb going
Mm.
into it, because it helps your body get used to burning fat and using that for energy, versus like starving for sugar or carbohydrates. And so so it makes it easier going into it, because when you start getting into those longer hours without eating, your body can efficiently start burning the fat cells, or using the fat cells for energy, versus being hung out to dry, and you start having those really bad cravings, making it hard for you to actually complete it.
Mm.
And then at the same time, now that you're not, or if you're not able to produce those or convert those fat cells into sugar, um, well, now you're putting more of a stress on your body, which makes it somewhat harmful for your body.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Even if you're not type 1 diabetic, if you're type 2 or otherwise, going into intermittent fasting in a low carb or keto state makes it definitely easier, without a doubt, because your body is used to it. It's knows how to use that fuel for energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think as a type 1, getting started into it, obviously, especially if you've never even experimented with keto before, The thought is, well, low blood sugar. What the heck do you do with that? Whether you're talking about those types of diets, or you're talking about intermittent fasting in a time when you're not supposed to be eating, what do you do? And I have my own thoughts and kind of protocols, but what would be some tips and tricks that you would be doing, or what you would give as advice?
Yeah. So ultimately, first, with fasting in general, you have to ask yourself, because there's so many different like types of fasting, like as far as what you can and cannot consume. Um,
There's a lot of actual debate.
yeah. To me, like straight up fasting is basically water only. Because you have nothing that your body's trying to metabolize. Well, that's just tea, because it has to metabolize the tea, and that puts some sort of stress on the liver. Obviously, not very much, but at the same time, it's some. Um, and so ultimately, anything beyond that is can be considered not necessarily a true fast, but at the same time, you have to consider what are your goals with this fast. Is it just blood sugar regulation? Is it helping with your gut function? Ultimately, that helps kind of set your own regulations as far as what you can and cannot consume, and still not breaking that fast. So for me, most of the time it's blood sugar regulation and sometimes gut function, are the kind of the two reasons that I will jump into it. And so for the most part, if my blood sugar gets low, I basically just use what I usually use when I get low, which is juice boxes, because it's pretty much just straight sugar and water. And so with that sugar, it's very easy for your body to process and very easy for your body to get it back into the cells and raise your blood sugar back up without doing a lot of damage per se to the fasting process. Um, and so it's relatively clean, relatively efficient. And so to me, drinking a juice box doesn't break my fast. It just, because ultimately, if I drink a juice box versus if I don't drink a juice box during a fast, it doesn't have that much effect on the end result after the fast is done. I still see relatively the same results as a result of it. So that's kind of my go-to because of what I've experienced.
Yeah, I think that phrase in there that you said is really, really important, and I think that's a good strategy. Is keeping it simple, but it's the strategy is based off something you said, and I want to repeat it: is the stress on your liver, and I think just overall stress on your system. And so, what that really means is how hard does your body have to metabolize what you're consuming to get the effect, and how much stress is that putting on your system. So if in a non-intermittent fasting state or in a non-intermittent fasting conversation, people might treat low blood sugars with juice boxes, but they also might treat low blood sugars with a Snickers bar, which is not necessarily a good thing to do. Or they might just treat low blood sugar by eating, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
having their meal. And I think that's probably a better example for comparison. And so if you use a meal to treat your low blood sugar, your body is digesting combination of macronutrients, micronutrients, and plenty of other environment, phytonutrients, plenty of other little things that your liver has to go through and break it down and put it into your blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the more stress you put on it, the harder it's going to be to get back into that intermittent fasting state. And based, like you said, based on your goals, then therefore it'll start to either break your goals or be in line with your goals. And so my thought was always to do glucose tabs. And that's depending on what kind of glucose tabs you get, is just pure dextrose, which is glucose. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
different form of it. It's just glucose in a different molecular form of D. But some glucose tabs have red dyes in it and yellow dyes in it, and vice versa. So that could be harder on it, right? That could be harder on your liver to break it. But at the same time, if that's if you care about that, or if you don't care about that is the factor, and that's what your goals break down to. So
Mm-hmm.
I always had a goal of my thought was, well, a glucose tab, if it was a cleaner glucose tab, it wouldn't break a fast because it's just straight sugar, and it's just going literally straight into my body. There's probably very little metabolizing that needs to happen. It just is treating the low blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my thought. That was my philosophy when I was doing it, was okay, if I have a low blood sugar, I'm going to use the most simplest thing I can, which is that. I think it's great that you use juice boxes. I actually wish I used juice boxes more because it's way more self-contained and probably cheaper. But I'm not sure if you can use a health savings account or HSA account for juice boxes, though, where I know I can use that for glucose tabs. That's a little
Yeah.
bit more insurance and finance side of things. But anyways, my thought was always using simple things. And if it's not even that, if you're going to use food, low blood sugar, you should be using berries. You should be using simple things, as little complexity as possible to raise your blood sugar. Even that berries definitely would break a fast, or a pure intermittent fasting keto zealot.
Yeah.
That'd be a no-go. But again, on your goals, simple sugars, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because and even going back to maybe some other goals that people have with intermittent fasting, like weight loss, and maybe concern with that sugar breaking up that ketosis or fat breakdown. To me, at least, I haven't noticed too much of effect. And to me, that sugar that you're consuming for the low blood sugar, like your body wants to utilize that right away. So it's not going to hang around. It's not going to affect a lot of things because it's just going
Right.
straight, into the cells as quickly as possible. So I don't see it affecting ketosis as much. I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, where I had been eating, plenty of sugar via like berries and stuff, and had a urinalysis done with my blood work, and there's plenty of ketones in there, and that's with still having a good A1C, and my blood sugar at the time of the test was still in, I think it was like below 100. So it wasn't like a diabetic ketoacidosis. It was from diet, even though I was consuming sugar. So that should tell you that, and everybody's a little bit different in regards to that, but at the same time, especially in that state of low blood sugar, like your body wants to use that as quickly as possible. So I
Mhm.
wouldn't be too concerned about that. So don't just try and fast longer, and just maybe change your basal rate if you have a severe low.
No.
I did that initially when I was really hardcore into intermittent fasting, where I'd start to kind of feel low. So I'd like turn my pump off or suspend it or change the basal rate, and try to do it that way. And ultimately, I usually was able to do that, but I was
Mhm.
in a low state for a very long time because it takes a while for your body to kind of bring that back up without that insulin in there. And I think ultimately it's probably more detrimental to your body to go that long period of time with, even if it's
Mhm.
just a slightly low blood sugar, versus just drinking that juice box and getting it right back up to good levels. Because that low blood sugar, man, your body's gonna kick out cortisol, it's kicking out adrenaline that whole time that your blood sugar is low. And
Mhm.
so it's like you're trying to run away from a bear for hours on end, and that's just not what our bodies want to do all the time. And
Mhm.
ultimately, the goal of this intermittent fasting is getting your body into more of a healing state and trying to heal your body and get it functioning better. But if your
Right.
body's throughout that whole time, if your body's in that stress state because of low blood sugar or whatever the case may be, you're not going to be getting much of those benefits that you're trying to seek, anyways.
You know what? That's a great point, Grady. Actually taking a moment to realize what's happening if you try to ride it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done the same thing before too, where it's like I don't want to metabolize anything. I know I'll be okay. And there were some great mental lessons and great lessons I learned by doing those things. Um, of trying to wait it out, change the basal rate, turn the pump off if you have a pump. But you know, taking a moment to say, hey, what am I actually doing as a type 1 to my blood sugar by riding it out? I am desensitized my body to low blood sugar. So I'm not going to get my internal alarms as fast or at that level anymore. It's going to take a lower level, which isn't a good thing, especially if you don't have a CGM,
Yeah.
right? You're pumping out more cortisol, adrenaline. And that is, again, I wanted to just repeat what you said because it was fantastic. That is making your body in a catabolic state when your body's the goal is to be anabolic. You're trying to heal, you're trying to recover, be parasympathetic, you know, during this time. And the more of that you have, the less of a positive effect you're getting from the intermittent fast. And so it's literally going against your goals and actually not the best strategy, not to mention also dangerous, right? Because there were times where it's like, I know I'm 56, I'm okay. I'm just going to turn my pump off in 3 hours from now. If I don't do anything, I'll be okay. And that's not, you shouldn't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, it's dangerous both in that moment, but like you said before, it desensitizes you.
Yeah.
And that's scary in and of itself, because when your body stops alerting you when you're getting lower and lower and lower, that's when scary stuff happens, when you don't wake up in the night from a low blood sugar, or all of a sudden you pass out and you didn't even realize you're low. So desensitizing yourself, I mean, that can happen fairly quickly,
Yeah.
over weeks, if you're constantly being low, day in and day out. And so by doing that, by being low for a long period of time, it can quickly desensitize you. And that's ultimately when scary stuff happens.
Absolutely. There's been maybe 2 times in my life where I've been really desensitized and wouldn't get symptoms until I was really low. And that's not a comfortable feeling. And you're like, I need to fix this. Like, this isn't okay. I probably the worst when it was at, probably I wouldn't get symptoms till I was like around 40. And like, that's not okay.
Not okay.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, hopefully you're never getting that low, but we're diabetic. It will and can happen, but to not get symptoms until then is not a good thing. And now, I've changed my habits, my life around where I comfortably get symptoms around like 70 or 72. I'm like, oh, that's all? I thought it was like super low,
Yeah.
and um and so it's a good thing to get alerts, internal alerts at that point. So you don't want to go against those things. So, if you are doing intermittent fasting, doing it where you check your blood sugar often enough, doing it where you have a strategy, juice boxes, glucose tabs, whatever, maybe the berries, whatever you're going to do, so that you can treat those things. So that way you can still, get the the best effect from it all.
Yeah. And going along that kind of same line, like when you start intermittent fasting, things change really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Both with blood sugar, but other things as well. But obviously, we're talking about blood sugar. Like your basal rates are gonna need to change pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that always depends on what like window you're at. So like my preference on intermittent fasting is eating when I first wake up, and that's when my window starts. And so essentially I'm fasting through the night,
Mm-hmm.
and that ultimately has a big effect on my blood sugar. Like my blood sugar and my basal rates have to come down quite a bit, and usually relatively quickly. So I'm typically, when I'm not intermittent fasting, I eat later at night. I don't like that I do that, but I do that. And so now that when I remove that, my blood sugar through the night goes way low. And so I typically have a separate basal pattern, or basal rate on my pump, that I will change if I know I'm going to be intermittent fasting that night. It needs to come cut almost in half, honestly,
Oh, wow.
compared to without it. And so that can change within literally that one day. It can change
Mm-hmm.
that fast, especially now that my body is used to it and get good and is pretty good at getting into that kind of state.
Mm-hmm.
When you first start out, it may not be quite that fast, but ultimately, like the more you do it, especially if you do it, day after day, you're definitely going to need to change your basal rates, both up and down. Like, um, I also noticed that, like, yes, it did go down quite a bit at night, but then in the morning, my dawn phenomenon, where it goes up in the morning, it actually would go up a little bit higher than it would before, or if I'm not intermittent fasting. So oftentimes I'll have to change my morning basal rate to actually increase it a little bit to kind of catch that cortisol spike
Sure.
beginning of the morning.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I had a couple of thoughts while you were saying that. And I think as you are exploring changing your basal rate, so let's keep talking about the pump for now. You need to, we encourage people, and we have encouraged people to, that's how you take your life in your control. If you always wait till you saw your endocrinologist or your primary care to change it, especially with sometimes how long it is to take, it might be a long time for you to make these changes. So I think you need to be comfortable enough with making these changes if you're going to do intermittent fasting. And if you're not, that's a sign that maybe you should show more self mastery of your own diabetes, which can come in any way. There's not like a strict criteria of what that means, but really what that means is being comfortable enough to change those things and know that you're going to be okay and you have strategies. And once you feel like you're comfortable enough to change your basal rates on a pump, maybe then that's when you can start exploring intermittent fasting. But that being said, if you start to change your basal rates, I've done it where I've changed basal rates and created patterns where it's like, that wasn't the right thing to do. That was too much. And then you go super high. And that's going to happen too. And that's not going to kill you. That's not going to affect you, or rather, that shouldn't deter you from doing it because it's part of the learning process. And if you keep dialing it in, that's okay. And I think, as long as if you go in thinking this is it and it's going to be perfect, just like anything in life, if you go in doing something for the first time thinking you're going to be a rock star, you're going to set yourself up for failure. And, you need to expect failure to get the more growth out of it all.
Yep. And just because I said it cuts in half for me doesn't mean that that's going to be the way it goes for you. So ultimately, just like with anything, you just have to kind of incrementally and kind of experiment as far as how your basal rate needs to change, and then how that affects your body, and ultimately that comes down to the data that you're getting. So whether you're wearing a CGM or you're checking your blood sugar a lot, that's going to obviously be really, really helpful for mastering the control of your blood sugar when you're intermittent fasting versus when you're not.
And I think, CGM obviously is ideal for a scenario like this as well. But if you're not on a pump and multiple daily injections, there's still possibilities out there where you can be changing your basal rates and changing how much long-term insulin or medium, if you're doing medium-term insulin going on. But again, there has to be some confidence in some of your own mastery of what you're doing for those as tools to use those types of insulin and to experiment with them. And I think I've been on a pump after my first year of being type 1 diabetic. I was on MDI then, and after year 1 I've been on a pump ever since. And I've never taken a pump holiday or changed it. But I think if I were to, because I've thought about not being on a pump, specifically if I thought about doing Ironmans or something other stupid triath, something silly. How would I do that? And I think I would be using multiple daily injections and a pump and things like that. And so bringing it back in, needs to be mastery and comfortability with the shots you're using, understanding it, asking your primary care, how does this really work? Don't just give me a short answer like, I want to learn how I can use this and how much I can increase it and decrease it, units per day, and go from there. Because I think intermittent fasting is still possible if you're doing a long-term shot. But if you're doing like a Lantus, I mean, a lot of people have low blood sugars like pretty fast after delivering the Lantus. And so, okay, you need to take that in consideration of when you're giving that shot to when you're starting your intermittent fasting and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think the multiple daily injections is definitely a lot more complicated with intermittent fasting just because of that severe fluctuation in your need for insulin. Because like I said, like my daytime insulin is almost half of my nighttime insulin when I'm intermittent fasting. And so ultimately relating that back to MDI, I imagine that would be hard to navigate with just using like a Lantus or something like that, to where it's like a fairly consistent flow of the same amount of insulin throughout that time. To me, you may have to experiment a little bit more with the medium acting insulins to get it dialed in for that. Um, I don't know. It'd be interesting to talk to a MDI user and see if they've tried intermittent fasting, and how they're able to navigate that. Because to me, that would just be, it seemed like it'd be a lot harder
Mm-hmm.
than using a pump.
And if you do MDI and if you feel like it's too hard, that's okay. There's other tools and other diets and other resources you can do. Not every strategy is for you. I mean, I don't use intermittent fasting anymore because past 2 years I've been running a lot, and my calorie composition compared to when I can eat compared to what I'm doing throughout the day and refueling, I'm not low carb, by any means anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just intermittent fasting doesn't make sense for me at this point.
Yeah.
How life is being lived, and that's okay. It's
Yeah.
not like that's the great thing about life is that there's not one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are using MDI and curious about it, if it doesn't work out, that's okay. And there's probably a way that could work out, but if your life says no, then don't fight it. There's other ways to get other good results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, like I always think of intermittent fasting in the way that I do it, which is like 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. But ultimately, you could also try like 24-hour fasts with MDIs. That would make it a little bit more consistent as far as your eating throughout the day, to make it a little bit easier as far as the long-term insulin and managing that. So maybe using different types of intermittent fasting with MDI to make it easier for you to control that, would be another kind of option to investigate too.
Hmm. And I think two more obstacles that I think we could maybe talk about. One would be, exercising as a type 1 diabetic while doing intermittent fasting. But another one, I don't even think we explained because we just assumed if you're listening to this episode, you know what intermittent fasting is, but just how to get started. Like you do 16/8, like what does that really mean? And how do you build up to it? Because with patients, when I use intermittent fasting as a tool for their plan, I have them build up to something like that. So what does 16/8 even mean? Let's take a, a moment or two to kind of what we should have maybe talked about initially and just describe what that even means.
Yeah, so 16/8 is basically 16 hours without eating, and then 8 hours is your eating window. So for me, I like to do it to time it to where I wake up in the morning and eat, and that has a lot to do with cortisol rhythm, because cortisol is typically highest in the morning and lowest at night, and so that has a lot to do with the fact that you've just now not eaten for 8+ hours, and so your body's trying to wake you up. So it's giving you that cortisol so you can go wake up, kill something, and eat it. And so that can also have an effect on your circadian rhythm, because if your cortisol is higher at night, it's harder for you, or you're not going to be producing as much melatonin, which then you don't get as much deeper sleep. And so that's why I do it that way, to where I'm fasting throughout the night and then waking up and eating. I know a lot of people that do it the other way, where they eat at night and then fast throughout the morning and the day.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, that's how I like to do it, in accordance with the body. Um, and so, as far as working up to it, I find for myself, and this ultimately comes down to, you have to know your body and how your brain works ultimately. And so that takes a lot of self reflection. And I know I'm an all or nothing person. If I don't do it, like if I don't start my fast before 5 or 6 at night, like I can't help myself from eating at night. So I basically start 16 and do 16. Maybe 14 if I wake up early and I eat a little bit earlier than I was expecting, but yeah, I just go straight into 6 or 16. But other people need to work up to it. Like they can't hardly go straight into it. And that sometimes has a lot to do with their diet and lifestyle going into it. Like we were talking about before, getting cravings, or just their body's not ready for that long extended fast. Which brings up another point that I was going to talk about earlier. which relates to this, which is um, making sure going into it that your body is ready for it. Like if you are a person that has a hard time maintaining their blood sugar throughout the day, whether you're type 1 diabetic or not, if you are constantly having lows and you have a hard time keeping it up, that's a sign that your body probably isn't going to do very well with going a long period without eating. And
Hmm.
so you have to first get your body ready for that. So sometimes that has to do with your ability to digest protein, because protein ultimately is what helps stabilize your blood sugar for a longer period of time. So if you're not getting enough protein and or not digesting that protein or metabolizing and absorbing that protein, those are the three things that I look at when people struggle with going longer periods of time without eating, to try and get their body to do those things. So that way, if they really want to do intermittent fasting, they can do it and it's not going to wreck them.
Right.
Um, and so that's an important thing to think about first, is making sure you can go a longer period of time without eating, because that ultimately will make it easier, obviously, to then actually do it. I feel like that's oftentimes why people struggle so much with doing it or starting right at that 16-hour versus having to work up to it, is because their body's just not built for it, or not
Mhm.
working efficiently enough to get into it. So yes, you can be super mentally tough and do it. But at the same time, like it's nicer when your body's ready for it,
Right.
and it doesn't take as much mental toughness.
I think that's a great point, and talk about digestive health, such a hot button phrase that I'm glad people are talking about is the term gut health. And gut health
Mm-hmm.
is related to digestive health. It's one and the same. But maybe when people think gut health, they're only thinking about dysbiosis or SIBO or whatever else. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, if somebody is having really low blood sugars anyways, or low blood sugar symptoms, working on their ability to digestion. And it's pretty awesome that a lot of people can help their digestion so fast. Like it doesn't necessarily take a long time. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't need to take a long time to improve somebody's digestion enough and digestion of protein enough to get it to where they can actually use those, amino acids and protein profiles from what they're actually eating and make a change in their digestive health. And sometimes if you never have worked on your health in that way, there might be things to do, and that's why I always have my patients work up to like a 16-8, because chances are the functional medicine patients that I see haven't done anything. They've maybe tried one thing, but they've like, I'm probably one of the first people they see compared to some functional medicine practitioners that they maybe have gone through a gambit of practitioners. There's a whole spectrum there. But if you've never worked on yourself, you might have some digestion issues that you might need to use and work on before you get into that. But if you start, with a 13-11 and 14, 14-9 or 14-10, whatever it would be, and keep working your way to it, you're probably working on your digestion health at the same time. And sometimes one of the things I love about intermittent fasting is that it's naturally going to eliminate the junk food you're already putting in your body in your life. And
Mm-hmm.
and so just by eliminating that type of food, your body will start to heal, and that can already help your digestion come further to the goals of getting to a 16-8 or something like that for an intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Intermittent fasting, like I said, the two things I use it for primarily are blood sugar and gut. And man, does my gut usually feel really good after doing sometimes even just one day of intermittent fasting. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that, but ultimately, I'll always notice that my gut and digestion work more efficiently and feel a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so that's kind of, and with intermittent fasting, it has multiple names, many types, like you said. I think maybe a good change of phrase, but this is we're going to keep calling intermittent fasting, is time restricted eating, time
Mm-hmm.
restricted feeding, TRE or TRF. Those are all the same thing. Maybe one's a little bit more scientific, but it's all the same thing, And one thing that I'm open to as research and literature on it continues to come out, is that there's arguments of people that don't like intermittent fasting that it's not about circadian rhythm. It's not about your hormones or your gut health. I would argue against that, but that, these people will argue that it's mostly calorie restriction and you get similar results with just restricting your calories, but not changing your time of day of eating that you would have intermittent fasting. And, if that trend tends to be true, which I don't think it is from what I've seen in some studies in animal models and things like that in my own patients. But if it is, who cares? You're
Mhm.
getting the result, you're getting the change, you're getting the improvement of health. And if it's easy for you to stop eating at 5 p.m. and then eat at 7 a.m., whatever it is, or the inverse, and not eat till noon and then eat throughout the day, who cares why the exact reason is? If it helps you get to your goals, that's what freaking matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like ultimately it's easier for most people to do time restricted eating versus calorie restricted eating,
and
meaning
count
that
and counting
you may eat
calories.
the same amount of times per day, but they have to be much less. I feel like a lot of people do much better with, hey, I'll just have 1 or 2 meals and eat however much I feel like I want to eat. And if you get the same result, great.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's why it's functional medicine is personalized. It's what are your goals, and we're getting a little bit more on the functional medicine side, not the type 1 diabetic side, but it's all related, right?
Hmm.
And so I think it's great. If that's something, I think it's way easier to do that, not think about it. One less thing. I don't have to plug in an app. I don't have to research the calories or the carbs or anything. It's just, if that was the goal, it's just shut it off. I'm no longer eating unless
Yep.
as a type 1 diabetic, you need to have, a bump in your blood sugar. So, um, great. Maybe the last obstacle would be exercising, right? Exercising and intermittent fasting. And I've definitely done longer fasts. I've done extended fasts where I've done some runs and workouts and things like that. But you definitely need to be careful, I think. And so, what is your experience both with yourself and patients, maybe with intermittent fasting and exercise?
Yeah. So I talk to a lot of people that love doing fasted exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hate it. I don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like when I'm doing intermittent fasting, where it is like 16 full hours, like my body hates it. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing like fasted, as in like I ate the night before, but I worked out that morning and didn't
Mm-hmm.
eat breakfast first, like my body's relatively okay with that. Sometimes it's not happy, but um, yeah, I don't like doing it on extended fast or during my fasting window when I'm doing intermittent fasting because it puts so much more stress on my body. The reason why I say that is because I can see that in my blood sugar. I can see that in my sleep. I can see that in just how I feel and feeling on edge when I do that. So
That's
my blood
true.
sugar will tend to actually spike when I do that. When I exercise fasted like that, and that has a
More
lot to do with
so,
what's that?
like more so, like you'll have a higher cortisol response, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. My cortisol will spike. My sympathetics will spike. And ultimately, I'll have a higher blood sugar during and after my workout. And then my workouts themselves tend to suck. So I'm like, what? So it's like, why am I even in the gym if my workouts are going to suck?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to me, I don't like it. But I do know a lot of people that like doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it's just I feel like our bodies don't necessarily love that too much, especially if you're doing it consistently, just because of like I said, again, you're putting your body into that stress state versus that rest and digest,
Mm-hmm.
healing, losing weight type state.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can tap into more fat cells if you're in a fasted state and exercising. But to me, if you're doing that, you should probably be doing something very light, very easy. If you're doing something very strenuous on a fasted state, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like you're going to more often not be put into that sympathetic mode, which then ultimately breaks down protein to create sugar, not fat cells to make sugar. And the
Yeah.
one sources of protein to make sugar is your muscles. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
breaking down muscles to create sugar to keep your blood sugar up, well, that's not the goal of this, is it? Like, we want to
Mhm.
make sure our muscles are healthy. And ultimately, that's one of those things that helps us keep losing weight is the more muscle mass we have or lean mass we have. It helps us lose weight a little bit easier.
Mhm.
So to me, I don't really like, especially heavy working out or high intensity exercises on a fasted state. But like I said, some people love them.
Right. And that boils down to your goals and your lifestyle and what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. Right. A great workout would be if you're just walking or doing a stair climber or doing something light, right? But if
Yeah.
you're planning on doing a high intensity workout, that's already going to spike your blood sugar if you weren't intermittent fasting or weren't fasted. That response is going to go super high with it. And then if you have caffeine still in your system, that's going to even make those effects even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think balancing, okay, am I gonna work out while fasted? There's probably more cons than pros, but you won't know that until you start experimenting it with yourself. But then if you find that it is negative, or if it is positive, then you need to think about, well, can I only work out during a certain time of the day? Can I only work out in the morning or versus the nighttime? And then you compare that answer to what is best. Can I do the intermittent fasting in the evening or in the morning? And if those don't line up to when you can work out versus how you feel while working out in a fasted state, then that's a sign that maybe you A shouldn't do intermittent fasting, or B, you shouldn't work out while intermittent fasting, and it all is part of the equation of figuring out what should or shouldn't you do. But when it comes to lows, you might have a low going into it. You might still end up getting a low during it, might not have this giant cortisol response. But again, it's if you have a low while fasted, while exercising, again, same rules apply to juice box and glucose tabs, and keep it simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing too is like, I always just think about that and think about exercising in a fasted state in the sense that you are exercising basically at the end of your window. So your body's already in that fasted state. However, if you're exercising in your fasting window, but it's like relatively shortly after you've eaten, that's a different story. Like, your body's not in that fasted state, so it's not going to have that sympathetic response that it would. So I
Right.
just wanted to clarify that. Like, yes, like exercising in that fasted window, like maybe early on in that fasted window, might actually help you get into that fasted state a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be beneficial, and something worth trying. But ultimately, like I said before, um, working out at the end or towards the end of that fasted or fasting window, I don't like it too much.
Yeah, that's a great concept to apply it to. So what that would actually look like is, let's say you stop eating at 5 p.m. But you work out at 5:30. Stop working at the end of the workday as you're driving to the gym, and you start working out at 5:30. That would be a very real and maybe a beneficial way of working out in a fasted state. I'm not sure if you could argue if you're in a fasted state at that exact moment, but you're starting your fast.
Yeah.
That might be a way as a type 1 diabetic or anyone that you might get a lot of benefits from, at that exact moment because you're not eating. Well, how different is that maybe comparing it to having a pre-workout meal and then driving to a gym? In this
Mhm.
example, maybe not a whole lot, but as a tool, as how you can conceive to do it and make it work, that would be, a great example and a great way to visualize how something like that would pan out.
Yep.
So we talked about a lot of obstacles, and you mentioned a couple of things throughout the episode so far about benefits, right? Gut health, blood sugar, mind, brain clarity, brain health. You know, let's kind of take a moment and go into how that can affect those things in a little bit more. Like, what would that and how would that actually do that? Those things.
Yeah. So, um, like with blood sugar regulation, like eating or going that long without eating, ultimately it's actually doing several things at the same time. So like with going that long without eating, what I essentially generalize it to is that it's allowing your body to catch up. So like if you're constantly bombarding it with
Mhm.
food or coffee or different drinks, it's constantly having to process those things. So when I say process, that means digest them, metabolize them, absorb them, And then whatever effects it's having on the body itself, it's processing that as well. So what um, fasting allows your body to do is catch up. So not only fully metabolizing or relatively fully metabolizing all those different foods and products that are coming into the body, but then at the same time on that later end, now it's able to now that it's caught up, now it's able to process all the things that it's been wanting to process, but it hasn't had the chance because it's been busy doing all these other things. So in the liver, that obviously the liver does so many different things, but that can be detoxification and elimination of different toxins, whether those are external toxins, internal toxins. That's also in the liver, allowing your liver to catch up as in regards to blood sugar regulation. Your liver does a lot as far as blood sugar regulation goes. Um, we've described this a lot before, but we'll say it again. When you eat something, eat some carbohydrates, your liver will convert those excess carbohydrates into glycogen. If there's even more sugar left over, it'll convert that excess sugar into triglycerides. And then at that point, for the most part, it'll start spilling over into the bloodstream and creating more higher blood sugar. So what that extended fast does is allows your liver to kind of catch up, clean up the excess sugar that may be flying around and store it away either in fat or as glycogen, and ultimately help bring that blood sugar back down and help regulate a lot better. Um, and then from a gut aspect, again, it allows your body to catch up. So I know when I've been eating either too much or too frequently or too late at night, I can just tell like my body just feels full, and not necessarily in a good way. Everything just feels full. I feel heavy. And things just don't feel like they're flowing very well or very quickly through my GI tract. And so I notice when I do intermittent fasting in regards to my GI tract, like the first time I eat, when I break my fast, like I just feel like it goes nice and smooth, like through my GI tract. Like it doesn't get hung up anywhere. Like the body's like ready for it. And it's got all these enzymes and stored up, all this acid stored up so it can start digesting that food right away. And it's ready to receive that food through the GI tract and absorb it because it's waiting for those nutrients. I just feel like everything runs much more efficiently and effectively through my GI tract when I do that. I usually have less bloating, and yeah, I just feel overall my abdomen just feels much better.
Both for the blood sugar and how the liver uses sugar to form glycogen, triglycerides, and increase blood sugar, as well as the gut health explanation. You can imagine the classic iconic scene from I Love Lucy, where Lucy and whatever her friend's name is are just in a conveyor belt, and there's a bunch of chocolates going by, and they just don't have time to like wrap it or whatever that, or maybe it's sushi. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's funnier if it's sugar in this example, if it's like some kind of chocolates, and just start pouring it in, like putting it in their mouth because they can't keep it up.
Yeah.
Cheeks are full, and then it starts going everywhere. It goes off the conveyor belt, and it goes all to crazy. And somebody walks in like, "What's going on here?" And it's just like a complete mess. But if in that scene, if they slow down the conveyor belt and decrease the load of what was going on it, they would have the opportunity to wrap it up or do whatever the heck they needed to do with what was going down by them. And that's the same exact thing with both your digestion and letting your gut, your stomach, your small, larger intestine, your colon kind of do what it has to do, as well as your liver to metabolize any insults, any internal, external toxins. It allows it the actual time to break it down and kind of move forward efficiently. And that scene is exactly what happens in your body when you're intermittent fasting. And I think that's why there's so much more of a benefit than just calorie restriction, is because there's so much how it affects all the systems together is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on top of that, like with the liver and blood sugar, like at that time when you now have no sugar coming in for a while, now your liver can start breaking down that excess fat tissue that's storing up all those triglycerides to then use those triglycerides as energy and burn
Mm-hmm.
them up. So you can start losing weight because of that. And at the same time, your fat cells are typically where you store a large amount of toxins in your body. So it can be a way to kind of help detoxify from that aspect too, as far as getting rid of those toxins that are being stored away, and clean those out as well.
And that brings another functional medicine point into the conversation, in that, you know, if you do have some toxins stored away in your adipose tissue and starts breaking it down more, if your liver isn't healthy, if you're doing this and you haven't done a lot of things, and that's okay if you haven't, but if your liver isn't functioning at the right percentage it needs to, then you might actually have a bad time. You might have a bad reaction, and that's why fat loss sometimes can be pretty complicated, because you start flaring up some other things because your liver can't handle the toxins it's trying to clear out. And so making sure you're doing proper liver protocols or whatever it's got to be, to make sure that you can support phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 detoxification in your liver, is vital. And you might run into that as a type 1 diabetic or not, and with intermittent fasting.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, like I said, it's a powerful tool. So you can push your body a little bit too far, and or push a good thing too hard as far as like detoxifying, and mobilizing all those toxins. If your body's not ready to process all those things, both from liver, but also
Mm-hmm.
those elimination systems. So that's your GI tract, that's your kidneys,
Mm-hmm.
that's your skin. If your skin's not able to sweat all that stuff out, all those things play a role in getting those toxins out. So, like you said, if they're not working efficiently, and or they're not ready for that big load, then you might feel a little worse in different ways. That could be, brain fog or headaches. That could be skin reactions. It could be a lot of different things. So if you're feeling worse, um, you need to investigate, why are you feeling worse.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because of you're just not able to maintain your blood sugar, or is it because your body can't, or you can't handle that dump of toxins?
Right. So that's a great reason to, as you start to self-experiment with some tools, some information like this and other places, if you get some, I don't know how to navigate, that's a great reason to see Dr. Donahoe or myself or anyone else. It's a great reason to be like, okay, I'm in it. What do I need to do? How do we get past this obstacle? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. And then, as you improve blood sugar and gut health, that's going to affect your immune system, like you said, other elimination systems, your kidneys. That'll help your brain health, and that'll help your nervous system. And it starts to affect these, especially when you understand all your systems are integrated with one another. And so as you start to work on these, you will feel positive effects in other ways as well. So so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then there's also a lot of talk, about, and you won't necessarily notice this in general, but it's something that's brought up a lot in research, which is autophagy, which is basically means that, it also puts your body into a state to where it can help clean up dead or damaged cells, that just are taking up space and maybe even causing some dysfunction in certain tissues. So it can help with overall healing process and just kind of cleaning out the crud that's in your body.
Mhm. I when when I do fast or do something along those lines or take cold showers, I literally tell myself, yeah, I'm getting rid of all the useless cells, all the ones that are weak.
Yeah.
No, there's no room for weakness in this body. Hoorah!
Yeah.
like like as a kind of a funny joke, but yeah, there can be some positive effects of getting some slackers in terms of components of different systems like that, and some autophagy. Um, what are some people that you've already mentioned? If your blood sugar is kind of low, a lot of the time you have poor digestion. Maybe that's somebody who wouldn't do intermittent fasting. What are some other people? Like in my mind, anemic people might be pretty hard to do something like intermittent fasting. Type 1 diabetics can often be anemic. What are some maybe other groups of people that might be like an asterisk to figure out if intermittent fasting is right for them?
Yeah, I would say the most common is those people that have low blood sugar. And sometimes that's hard to identify. So like I would say also adding into that maybe like people who are really sensitive individuals. And people, when I say that, you will probably know who you are if I say that. But like people
Mm,
who are really sensitive to like even just taking a simple supplement and they get like a dramatic change, whether that's good or bad. Oftentimes it's bad for these types of people that are really sensitive to things. Um, Oftentimes when you use powerful tools with those types of people, they don't respond very well. You have to be very subtle in changing. So that's sometimes hard to identify. Sometimes people don't necessarily know how sensitive they are to different things. But like if you notice like you're really sensitive to caffeine and it really sets you off, or like it you feel like you're strung out, or your body just can't handle it, or you've taken different vitamins or supplements or herbs in the past and have had really bad reactions to those things, um, then I would say just take it with caution. Maybe start with 12 hours, work up to 13, 14, and take it very cautiously. Um, Maybe another thing is like people with um, autonomic nervous system issues. So that can be people who have had basal vagal responses, meaning that basically that's where your sympathetic nervous system is so ramped up, and then all of a sudden it just kind of drops out, and your parasympathetic system kind of takes over, and basically you get that tunnel vision, and you kind of get really dizzy and pass out. Those types of people, I would say you need to fix that before you start doing something like intermittent fasting, because that's
mm,
probably actually maybe make it worse and more frequent. Um, that is kind of what comes to my mind off the top of my head. A lot of times it's like you just kind of know by talking to the person when they're in there talking about what different problems that they're having. You kind of get an idea. Yeah, that's probably your body's probably not ready for that. Like people that you can just tell are really stressed out, whether that
yeah.
be because of mental emotional stuff, it could be because of something that's going on internally, but something that screams at you like, I can't handle stress. I can't handle a lot of stuff at one time. I can't handle a lot of noise. You know, those are different type of little things that you can kind of pick up on. Like, hey, my nervous system or my body just doesn't handle a lot of things very well. Um,
Mhm.
then that's something that I always stray away from as far as suggesting like really powerful tools like intermittent fasting right off the bat, especially. I usually try to work on their other things or other systems to try to get them healthy enough to where, yeah, if they still want to do that, okay, let's try that now. But like at the beginning, let's try and make you healthier first.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Keeping it simple in terms of, who shouldn't do it. If you're very reactive or really high strung, meaning high cortisol situation because of external factors. I'm going to even open it up to that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether that be work, whether that be family living, whether that be school, whether that be you're working a 40-hour a week job and then you're going to school at night and then you got 3 kids at home. Like you can't, the major cause of stress in your life that you're unable to change or figure out how to maneuver it, if that is literally like the root of it. I'm not saying kids is always super stressful, but I have plenty of people that work like 100-hour weeks, and it's like they're just trying to get by, and they know they need to change their situation, but and until they do, it's like we're trying to maintain some level of normal in their physiology, but sometimes life just you just have to ride the wave. And if you are in a situation like that where you can't change your external factors, doesn't and I think a lot of times perceived you can't, but if you actually cannot change your factors, those external factors, this might not be the right tool for you at that exact time. And trying it and slowly going into it might be the right thing, like you suggested. But I think that's a better, in my opinion, better articulation. If there's things you can't control that are making it really hard, making life really hard, that might be the sign not to do it at that exact moment.
Yep. Yeah, like people who are very anxious too.
Mm-hmm.
That's another kind of descriptor. Like if you're very anxious or have a lot of anxiety, that's kind of a sign that your body is in a very stressed state. So your body may not be ready for something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but we know that anxiety, depression, hard living is rampant everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
United States, outside the United States, many other countries, continents, you know, it's and but the great thing about this type of work it's not this pharmaceutical um thing you have to wean off to and titrate out of. If it doesn't work, you don't have to do it.
Yep.
you know
Exactly.
and it's you could try it for a little bit and be like that can't do that. Okay, great, we know that that's information. Let's
Mm-hmm.
use that information and do something different, right?
Yep.
So wow. Well, do you have anything else? I think we covered a lot more than I thought we'd actually go over. Talking about intermittent fasting. Um,
Yeah,
and
there's one other thing that something you said that this kind of triggered in my mind. Like people will ask
triggered.
how how long should you do it, or should you do it forever,
Mm,
back to back to back?
yeah.
That's always a hard question. Ultimately, what I've kind of come down to is you have to just listen to your body,
Mm-hmm.
and really pay attention to what it's trying to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I talked about before, if you're starting to feel like you're always on edge, you're always a little bit more anxious, or start feeling like, you know what, my blood sugar's kind of out of whack now, or whatever the case may be, something starts feeling a little bit off to where the benefits you were feeling are now, you may still be feeling some of those, but there's some things that are maybe popping up that weren't before. That's
Mm-hmm.
obviously a sign like, hey, we've gone too far. Let's kind of go back to normal, and maybe come back to it later. But I feel like this isn't necessarily something to do all the time, every day, day in and day out. It can be a really powerful tool that you can use for an extended period of time. Like if you're somebody with type 2 diabetes and or you're using it for weight loss, I feel like those people are a little bit more built to be able to do it for a longer period of time. Because I feel like with that extra fat storage, their body can maintain that blood sugar for a longer period of time once they're in that ketogenic state. Because I noticed when I've done it in the past, doing it for an extended period of time, um, I feel like when I lose or get down to a certain weight, I will actually really start to feel worse and a little bit more anxious, a little bit more on edge, have more of that cortisol spike in the morning, or cortisol spike when I'm working out. And I know that's not me. That's not how my body functions. It's not how I want my body to function. And so
Mm-hmm.
at that point, I'm like, okay, let's take a break for a while, and then we can always return when I feel like I need to. Um, and so I tell people kind of cycling in and out in and of itself. Like even if you do plan on using it for long term, maybe cycling in and out, like doing like 5 days on, 2 days off, or vice versa. Um, like I said before, I'm a very all or none person. So I do it until I feel my body says not to do it anymore. And that's when I stop. But some people do okay with, weekends. I'll eat however I need to. And
Mm-hmm.
then the weekdays when I'll do my intermittent fasting. I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Listening to your body is definitely needs to happen. I think it was actually really interesting once I just on that comment when I was re-downloading my Dexcom app for the first time in like 8 months and putting it on. There was actually a disclaimer of with the Dexcom G6, it's FDA approved to treat off of the readings, but it was like listen to your body. If it doesn't make sense, check your blood sugar, like act accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was very interesting and actually really smart of
Yeah.
them to say, listen to your body. And the same is true with this type of therapy of intermittent fasting or tool is listening. And, I think if you do 5 on 2 off, whether that's 2 days in a row or maybe I think would be hard to split up time off. Like on Tuesdays and Saturdays, you don't intermittent. I think that would be kind of hard. But
Mm-hmm.
if you do 2 days where you're not doing it and it ends up being the weekend, socially that makes it great, but as long as you're sticking to your plan, and your goals and your why, you're doing all those things,
Mm-hmm.
just not going crazy and drinking all this alcohol and like doing crazy stuff, because that's going to just put your cortisol and your liver in a hard state on Monday. And you probably won't maybe get back to the spot you need to be till Thursday. And then you only have 2 days of really good physiology until you wreck it again. So
Yeah.
just avoiding the weekend warrior type mentality of the weekend isn't exactly, if you're not doing it, then just keep in line with your goals, keep with your why. We're all human. We all make mistakes, but just don't use that as an excuse to be an asshole.
Yep. I totally agree with that. I'm glad you made that point because I forget about that a lot. That people will do what I call like the cleanse phenomenon, where they go on this cleanse and they eat super healthy and feel really great. And then as soon as that cleanse ends, they go out, they drink a bunch of alcohol, they eat a bunch of crap and junk food. And it's like all that work you just did, you've now undone and probably actually made your body worse.
Yeah.
And so on those days off, oftentimes if I do that, what I'll try to do is just eat like I said, I fast through the night. So if I'm taking a break from fasting, I'll eat like a very light meal at the end of the day or at that nighttime to where
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's still kind of getting my brain in that sense
Mm-hmm.
of like, okay, we're still on this train, we're not gonna go crazy, and at the same time it still keeps my body actually feeling pretty good without kind of continuing or putting more stress on it if I'm feeling like that intermittent fasting is getting a little bit too much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good strategy to keep it light, keep it pretty close to how you would eat without it. Eating how you would eat with it, but while you're not eating with it.
Yeah.
That didn't make sense.
That's all
That
right.
was
people
hopefully everyone
people know what you
understands.
meant.
That's the great gift um, of sometimes articulating it with many different means and not just my exact words. And why being a writer would not be suffice for myself. But hopefully everyone understands what I meant. But yeah, no, that's really good. That's perfect. So, yeah, let's see. Maybe let's end it with a. When do you think will be the next time you do intermittent fasting? And what was your last blood sugar reading?
Okay. So my last blood sugar reading was 64. That
Oh wow.
was I worked out this morning and then I went and shot my bow. So I was walking around. I actually had to stop early so I could feel the low blood sugar coming on, and I didn't have a juice box on me. I'm like, oh man, I gotta stop and walk back to the pickup.
Mm.
Um, so I did that, and that was right before I came over here to start the podcast. As far as intermittent fasting goes, let's see, when would have that have been? Probably about a month ago is when I last did it.
And when do you think you're going to do it again? Just when you need it? When you feel like your gut's all jacked up?
Yeah, let's see. I don't know. I'm always like, oh, I should do it, and then I ultimately haven't been doing that. I would say probably within a couple weeks, I'll probably do it at least one day.
Mm. Mm. Got it. Mm. Well, that's funny that you didn't have your juice box on you. I feel like you need a belt instead of like, a gunslinging person in Arizona. You're a juice box slinging
Yeah,
cowboy
exactly.
out there
Just
with
have
your
a
bow.
holster. Yeah.
Well, my last blood sugar, now that I have a CGM, I've been monitoring it this whole episode. I started off a little bit in the 60s with my blood sugar coming down, and then I was able to change my basal and have a few snacks, well, hopefully silently, while while recording, and I'm now 93, and it looks pretty steady. So that's pretty awesome. I love having these numbers by my side the whole time. But last time I did intermittent fasting was probably early 2020, in all honesty. And then when stress got too high, I realized it wasn't beneficial. I stopped it, and I probably won't do it. I'm planning on taking not a break, but definitely slowing down my running after my next race in October. And so after that, well, I'm going to reassess what my needs are, what I'm doing, what my goals are. And if I go back from a higher carb to a lower carb, and I would do that first, and then maybe add intermittent fasting in at that point, if that's what fits best. But it's definitely been like a couple years since I've done intermittent fasting. Done some just 24-hour fast here and there sprinkled in the past 2 years, but not a whole lot. But again, it's a tool. You should not be married to a philosophy of eating, but rather a tool of what the benefits are and what your goals are in life. So it just doesn't work out right now, and we'll see if I need it later.
Yeah. Oftentimes, like at least in the last few years, like I'll just use it for like 2 weeks tops, and then go back to what I was doing. I haven't, like years ago, I was doing it for like months at a time.
Yeah, me too.
And ultimately, I did notice big difference and a lot of positive changes. Like I think we've talked about this before, but intermittent fasting was one of the things that I had used to allow myself to go like several hours, like 12 to 16 hours without taking insulin. Was around the time that I was really consistent with intermittent fasting. So that was really cool.
Peptide was going up.
What's that?
Time. We were curious if you were getting like some beta cell function back at that time. I remember testing your C peptides at that time. That was kind of exciting. That was not good results. You were still diabetic.
Yeah, I also I think about that a lot too, because I was low carb and intermittent fasting. So even if I did have pancreatic cells or beta cells, they wouldn't have been producing anything anyways. The last several times I've done blood work, I have tested my insulin and C-peptide. So now I do it every time just to kind of see. And my insulin is below clinical level, even when I'm on insulin, because I eat low carb, and so I don't hardly need a whole lot of insulin. Which is always funny when people are people in the gym or people who work out are like, well, you can use insulin and just jack up and use it as a growth hormone. I'm like, my insulin is lower than your insulin, so don't even give me that.
That's a great response. That really is. Jesus. Well, that's awesome. Well, everyone, we appreciate the ears. This ended up being a pretty long episode. And if intermittent fasting is right for you, you can always ask a practitioner. You can always research around. But we appreciate the ears, appreciate the love, and we'll catch you next time on the Diabetes podcast.
See you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found value in today's conversation, we would appreciate it if you gave a 5-star review. It really helps us branch out our community and get our message across to those who really need to hear it. If you want to interact with us on social media, you can follow us on the Diabetes podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or moral outrages, you can email us at thediabetiespodcast@gmail.com. Thanks.